Is Bigfoot potentially a shapeshifter? This is something that I've often wondered for a while now, and I'll tell you why. Many years ago, I was visiting family out in Arizona, and some of my cousins, they live right next to a Native American reservation, and they had a lot of friends on the res. And they would go out there and visit their friends, and I would come with them. And I met this gentleman, really nice guy. And he seen, that I was wearing a shirt with Bigfoot on it. And he pointed to me and said, Chichunem. And I said, excuse me? And he said, Chichunem. And I said, you mean Bigfoot? And he said, yeah, Chichunem. And I proceeded to ask him about this. Why are you calling this thing Chichunem? And he said, in our culture, we have this story, we have this legend of the Chichunem, and it means one who hides amongst shadows. And he said that this thing hides in the shadows and can transform itself, can shapeshift to hide amongst people, to hide amongst the woods. And I said, well, is this sort of a story of perhaps like some sort of skinwalker? And he said, no. This is something spiritual. This is spirits who reside in the woods. These Bigfoot-like creatures are spirits, and that's what we believe, and that they often hide in the dark, in the shadows, and they can take different forms, or they can even be invisible and walk amongst you and you don't even realize it. So I thought that was just a really interesting story and legend that they had. And it made me start to think, does Bigfoot actually, is that why he's so elusive? Because he is more something than physical. He's actually a spirit who can hide amongst us at any time. Now, several years after this, I had an interesting encounter. I would hike at night, and there was this trail by my house, and it was a paved trail that went on for about 30, 40 miles. It was covered by woods, and on the outskirts were a bunch of residential areas. And I would walk this sometimes at night alone, and just, it'd be very peaceful in the summertime, very cool and calm, and just a nice, relaxing walk. And I never had any issues. It was a pretty safe area, nothing to worry about, or so I thought. And one night I'm walking down this trail, and I noticed this guy walking towards me. And I thought it was very strange because he had some sort of jacket on, yet it was almost like 80-something degrees that night, very humid and muggy. But this guy had, some type of weird jacket on. And he had his head down, and he just had this empty look on his face, like he was kind of out of it. And I'm kind of wondering, what's this guy doing, with a coat on, walking this late at night down this trail? Because I hardly ever seen people walking at night on the trail. And he just walks past me, doesn't, really look at me. And, I got a little freaked out. So I said, I'm going to look behind me and just kind of keep an eye as to where he goes or what he does. And I looked behind me, and he's gone. And I thought, okay, did he just disappear into the woods or run off into the woods or something? What happened? Well, I proceeded to walk, and I got about maybe 15, 20 minutes past this event happening. And all of a sudden, I hear something just crashing through the woods, and something making a loud screaming sound. And to me, how big this thing was crashing through the woods, it sounded like a rhino was charging right through the forest, right at me. And it freaked me out. And on top of that, like I said, there was a screaming sound, which was almost like ear piercing. And it just terrified me. I took off running. And I turned around to try and see, like, okay, what's this thing going to run out? What is this? Nothing came out of the woods. And it occurred to me, that's strange that happened right after I seen this dude walking on the trail. And I thought, were these things connected? Did he have something to do with what I seen, And I didn't think for a second that this was anything human because it was too big. I mean, this thing had to be at least, 400 or 500 pounds, very big, very large, and have the ability to break through the trees and the branches. And this was very thick, wooded area that it would have had to have been something very significantly large. So I don't think it was a human. And that made me think, after that, was that Bigfoot I seen? Do Bigfoot have the ability to shapeshift, as we often hear with these other cryptid-like creatures or phenomena? Does Bigfoot sometimes walk amongst us in human form, and we don't even realize it? There are many reports of these stories of Bigfoot changing into humans or human form. One such story I heard was from a group of hunters. And I'll tell you, if you ever want to hear good ghost stories or Bigfoot stories or just strange stories in general, man, you talk to hunters, because hunters are out alone in the woods at night, and they're often experiencing the things that come out at night. Well, I was talking to a group of hunters, and they said, one night they were hunting late, and normally they wouldn't do that, but they were strapped for time, and they wanted to do some night hunting, and I forget exactly what it was they were hunting, but some type of animal, deer maybe, I don't know. But anyways, they were hunting at night, and they were in a group, and they were moving through the woods, and they said they heard a loud commotion off in the distance, like something was kind of raging, almost like a bull off in the distance. And so they moved the direction of this sound, thinking it was some sort of animal. And they seen this Bigfoot-like creature run towards them and start chasing them through the woods. And one of the hunters actually turned back and shot at this thing and fired upon this creature. And they eventually got away and stopped hunting for the night. But he said the next day there was a person who worked at this camping area that they were staying at where they were hunting. And he seen this guy with a wrapped arm. And he said, what happened to you? And the guy said, I'd had an accident the night before, and, nothing important. Don't worry about it. And he said he thought that was really weird because it appeared as if he had some sort of wound from a firearm. And he thought that maybe did he accidentally, fire upon a guy that he thought was Bigfoot. But the guy didn't say anything about it. He didn't mention anything, and they never talked about it again. So it's quite interesting that you have the story of a man who seems to change into a Bigfoot form. There are many times when I know many people have went out hunting for Bigfoot or looking for Bigfoot or had Bigfoot encounters, and they report that they often hear vocalizations, they hear stuff moving around, but they cannot see these Bigfoot creatures. And it's almost as if they simply disappear. But do they really disappear, or are they hiding there? And in other videos I've talked about how they could be climbing and hiding up in the trees. But do they even have the ability maybe to shapeshift, or to change shape, or to hide amongst the shadows and be invisible to the point where we can't see them? And that's often something that I've speculated based on the Bigfoot stories that I've heard. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Let me know what you think, because it's definitely an interesting theory to think